Hey there, I'm Josh Sokol, the creator of SimpleRisk, and today I'm going to walk you through a demo of all the amazing features that SimpleRisk has to offer. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how SimpleRisk began. I was running the information security program for a large $1.6 billion a year publicly traded organization when my VP came to me one day and she told me she heard about this risk management thing and asked me if I could figure it out for her. I told her sure and began my research. Came across the NIST 800-30 framework for risk management and said this is what our program should look like. But the piece I struggled with was the tool set. I started out using an Excel spreadsheet to track our risk, but quickly realized that would not scale. From there, I used a homegrown Lotus Notes database. And finally, I began looking at the big GRC tools, the Archers and metric streams of the world. Eventually, I found one that I liked, and I sat back down with my VP. I told her, here's what our program will look like, and this is the tool that I need to do my job. I put a quote on her desk for about $500,000, and she just laughed at me. She said, Josh, your budget is $0. Go figure it out. With my background being in computer science and application security, I ended up writing something. Just a simple page to create a risk, a page to view it, and a page to list all of my risks, but was valuable for me, and I thought others could use it too. I ended up releasing it free and open source at the B-Sides Austin conference back in March of 2013, and SimpleRisk was born. As you'll soon see, we've grown a lot since then, turning SimpleRisk into a full-blown GRC suite that can hold its own against the 800-pound gorillas in the space, but we've always held fast to our humble beginnings, and to this day, still provide all of our governance, risk management, and compliance capabilities free and open source, so that everybody out there can do better than those spreadsheets. Now that you know where we came from, please allow me the opportunity to show you how SimpleRisk can help you mature your organization's GRC program. This is SimpleRisk. This is the first page you're going to see when you log into a SimpleRisk instance. It's designed to be kind of a stoplight view into risk management posture, where red is bad or at least an action that needs to be taken, and green is good or an action that has been taken. So you're going to see open versus closed risks, mitigations planned versus unplanned, and risk reviewed versus unreviewed. Along the bottom, you'll see a 13-month window of risk in your environment. How many risks were opened, how many risks were closed, that trend or the difference between them, and then the total number of open risks. So very quickly upon logging in, you know, am I doing better this month than it was last month, or this year than it was at this time last year? Now, in terms of risk management, this is based on that NIST 800-30 framework that I mentioned. NIST effectively says we need to be able to smear risks and keep a registry of all the risks in our organization. Talks about plan mitigations for risks. What are we going to do to address these risks? Talks about management being involved in this process through performing reviews. And it talks about being a cyclical process. We don't just review a risk once and forget about it. We need to make sure we're re-reviewing our risks on a regular basis. In terms of submitting risks, the only field that's actually required here is a subject field. I did this intentionally because in my risk management program when I first started out, I was a team of one, and I realized very quickly I did not scale. I needed to get everybody else involved in this process if I was going to be successful. So to make it as easy as possible, I only required a subject field. That said, there's all sorts of other fields available in SimpleRisk. We have high-level risks that you can map your risks into. We have threat mappings as well. You can define categories, select locations, set affected assets. You can set technologies, select teams, stakeholders, owners, and managers. We support 6 different risk scoring methodologies in SimpleRisk. Classic is what you learned on your CISSP. Risk is likelihood times impact. We also support weighted likelihood, weighted impact, and custom risk matrices. CVSS you find on CVEs. DREAD is the old school Microsoft risk rating methodology. OWASP is great for application security risks. Custom says just give me a 0 through 10 value. In contributing risk, we've got a big data center customer out in the UK and did a custom development effort to introduce their scoring methodology into SimpleRisk. It uses a single likelihood value spread across multiple weighted impact values, but now everybody has the benefit of being able to use it. You can add a text-based risk assessment, add your additional notes, attach supporting documentation. This field here comes from one of our SimpleRisk extras. Extras are plug-and-play modules that give you additional features and functionality. In this case, we're talking about the customization extra. Customization gives you the ability to add new fields. Maybe you have some custom KPIs that you want to track. It gives you the ability to remove existing fields. Maybe this page is too crowded and you want to remove some of these. You can even change the order of the fields on the page and really make it your own. We also have what we call our Jira integration extra. It's bidirectional communication with the Jira instance. So when you create a risk in SimpleRisk, it'll add a task in Jira. You create a task in Jira, it'll create the risk in SimpleRisk, and it'll synchronize fields between them. Lastly, we have a main-to-main relationship between risks and tags in SimpleRisk. So you can add as many tags as you want, and then you can use those tags to group, filter, and sort in our reporting. In terms of mitigations, this page is going to show us a list of all the risks that have not had a mitigation plan for yet, ordered by my highest inherent risk score on down. So I start at the top and click on No, and this will bring me to the page to plan the mitigation for my risks. Now here we can set our plan mitigation date, we can define what our strategy looks like, how much effort is involved, we can set costs, select an owner, we can set a mitigation team, I can set a mitigation percentage, and if we've defined our controls on the governance side of SimpleRisk, I can search through those controls, select the one that I want to map this to, and it's going to create a link between this risk and that control. Now we can also add text-based solutions, requirements, and recommendations, attach supporting documentation here as well. Every risk is going to give us the ability to add comments to the risk. We can actually have conversations about what's going on here, and every risk keeps its own audit trail of who did what and when. Now, when I hit submit, what we're going to see is our inherent risk score and our residual risk score is currently a 10 or very high, but I'm applying a 70% mitigation. So when I hit save mitigation, my residual risk will be updated. It's now a 3. And we can see how our scores are changing over time in our risk scoring history. The perform reviews page is going to show us a list of all the risks that do not have a management review performed for them yet, still ordered by the highest inherent risk score on down. So again, I start at the top, I click on no, and this brings me to the page to perform the review for the risk. Do I want to approve the risk or reject it and close it? If I approve it, what's my next step? Do I want to accept it until next review, kick that can down the road? Do I want to consider this for a project, in which case I can select an existing project or create a new one? Or is this a production issue? I'll handle it via some external process. In this case, I'm going to accept until next review. We could add some comments if we'd like. And then based on the risk score, SimpleRisk automatically calculates our next review date. Now, right now, I have a very high level risk. If I look at my configuration, I review very high level risks every 90 days. So 90 days from today would be April 17th. I can override this if I want to select a different date, but for now, I'm just going to accept the default, hit submit, and just like that, performed a review for this risk. Now, the one thing I'll note here is that this is risk 1867. Remember, it was at the top of my list of reviews to perform, but if I go back here, it's no longer there. So you can think of plan mitigation and perform reviews kind of like a checklist. They're designed to show you things that require action. However, once that action has been taken, they're effectively struck off the list, and they're only going to show you the remaining action items. The review regularly page is essentially my risk registry. It's going to show me a list of every risk in my system, ordered first by the next review date, then by the inherent risk score. So what we'll see here is all our unreviewed risks. The new risks in my organization will bubble up to the top. Then we're going to see things that are past due. Those are risks that were reviewed at one point in time but are now past the due date and require a re-review. And lastly, we're going to see all of my risks with future dates. So general best practice here is you schedule a monthly risk review meeting. You review all the risks coming due over the next month or so, anything that's unreviewed or just the newly submitted risks since our last meeting, and anything that's past due or just the few risks that have lapsed since our last meeting. And if you follow that monthly cadence, all of your risks should show future dates. On the governance side of SimpleRisk, this is where we define our frameworks and controls, we can add our documentation, and we can create exceptions. Now, in terms of frameworks and controls, lots of different ways to get these into SimpleRisk. You can click the plus button to create a new framework. I can go to controls and click the create control button to add a new control. We also have the import export extra. Import export gives me the ability to import controls from an existing spreadsheet. I simply select the file, map the columns in my spreadsheet to the fields in SimpleRisk, click on import, and it'll suck all those controls directly into the platform. Import-export also includes a content catalog with one-click installers to install certain frameworks into SimpleRisk. But the most popular option is going to be the Secure Controls framework. Secure Controls framework is a common control framework. There's over 1,000 security and privacy-related controls mapped across over 200 different frameworks. I simply select the frameworks that I want for my organization. I go to the Define Control Frameworks, and they will show up in my list. And now when I search through my controls, I can say, show me all the controls within the ISO 27001 framework, and it will narrow this list to just the controls that have to do with ISO 27001. Now, once I have the controls in SimpleRisk, there's a lot of things that I can do with them. I can certainly track the typical pass-fail status within each control, but within SimpleRisk, we have the concept of maturity. I can define the current level of maturity and the desired level of maturity for each of my controls, where I'm at today and where I'd like to get to. And this is highlighted in a report that we call the Control Gap Analysis Report. Control gap analysis allows me to select from any of my existing frameworks, and it draws a nice spider chart of where I'm at versus where I'd like to be. So I can tell I'm doing really well with respect to risk management, not so well with respect to asset management. Down below, we can see each control that's below, at, or above maturity. So I know these are the things I need to work on. These are the things I'm already doing really well at. But the real value in that secure controls framework is the idea that these are common controls. A single control maps across multiple different frameworks. So when I select a control from the ISO 27001 framework, the idea here is that this control actually maps to lots of other different frameworks. So here we see Gov 01. This is around security and privacy governance. It says we have mechanisms exist to facilitate the implementation of cybersecurity and privacy governance controls. And we can see that this is part of the ISO framework that's selected, but this is also in the new ISO framework. We can see that this is a part of GLBA, it's in PCI, and so on. So a single control maps across multiple different frameworks, which means from the testing standpoint, I can test the control once and it applies everywhere. You can also add your documentation to SimpleRisk, your policies, guidelines, standards, and procedures. We do a couple things with this. The first is version control. When you upload a new version of your information security policy, we'll keep the old one around as well. The other is notifications. This integrates with what we call our email notification extra. Now, the email notification extra gives me the ability to do action-based and scheduled notifications. Action-based notification says, hey, when somebody does a certain action, these are the stakeholders I want to notify. These are the templates that I want to use. Scheduled notification is more like workflows. This gives me the ability to say, hey, every single week, I want you to look for documents that need to be reviewed. I want to send them 2 weeks in advance and a week in advance and the day it's due. I want these people to be notified, and this is the template to use. So again, this helps us with our workflows, ensuring the right people receive these notifications on a timely basis. Now, on the governance side, you can also create exceptions. Exceptions are for places you're not following your document policies or controls. For example, I might have a password rotation policy. This says I rotate my passwords every 90 days, but I have a database I can't do that. It's on an annual release, and I can only change passwords as part of that release. So here I've created an exception for my password rotation policy. We can see the status is open. We could associate this with risk. We can define owners and stakeholders, when it was created, how often it needs to be reviewed, when it was last approved, who approved it, description, justification, and so on. And now when my auditors come, they'll say, hey, Josh, we noticed you're not following your password rotation policy. And I can say, yes, I know. We have a document exception, reviewed and approved at this date and time. It'll be re-reviewed on this date. Usually enough to make them go complain about something else. On the compliance side of SimpleRisk, this is where we're able to do the validation of our controls, ensuring that they're operating effectively. Here, you can create as many tests as you need to for each of your different controls. As an example, here I have the NIST cybersecurity framework, and I have a control that says physical devices and systems within the organization are inventoried. I've created two different tests for this control. One is for my on-prem devices, the other is for my cloud devices. And for each of these tests, we can define the test name, who's supposed to do the testing, additional stakeholders and teams, the frequency of our testing, when was last tested and when it needs to be tested again, the objective, the test steps, how long we expect to take, and then the expected results. You can think this like a template. This is something we're going to run over and over again each time we want to do our testing. And when we're ready to do an audit, we just go and initiate audits. And here we can do a framework level audit. So I can say I want to run every test across every control for an entire framework. We can do a control level audit and run all the tests associated with this IDA in one control. Or we can do an individual test and kick off this one test. Now, when I kick off this test, it's going to show up under my active audits list. We can see it right here. And we can look at the details of this test. Maybe I want to set this to pending evidence from control owner. My result is inconclusive. We can add all of our evidence here as attachments. I'm going to add a little summary here and then save this off. And we can see that the status of our audit has actually changed if we go back to active audits. It's now set as pending evidence from control owner. Now, when I ran our SOX audit program at National Instruments, one of the things I really struggled with was figuring out what is weighing on me versus what I'm weighing on somebody else for. This makes it incredibly easy. If I want to see all the things that I'm waiting on evidence from the control owner, I just select pending evidence from control owner and we'll see that. If I want to see all the things that evidence submitted pending review, or maybe I want to see all the things that James is responsible for, it makes it very easy for me to filter through the data, find what I'm looking for. Now, eventually, James will get me that evidence. They'll either pass QA or require remediation, and eventually we'll move this to a closed state. I'm going to mark this one as a pass, but if I were to mark this as a failure, the system will prompt me and say, hey, we noticed that this control failed. Would you like to create a new risk? And now we can associate risk in our environment with a control failure. We can plan the mitigation, fix these issues, so that next time this is a pass instead of a fail. Now, when I mark this as closed, it's going to disappear from my active audits list, but we can see it here under our past audits. We can see all the details of these different controls that we've done the testing on. We can see the results of these, whether they were pass or fail status, and we can see all the information about each control. We can see the evidence that was uploaded, we can see the result of the testing, the control information that was associated with it, and then the results that were received. We also have the ability to manage assets in SimpleRisk, and there's a few different ways to get your assets into the platform. The first is automated discovery. This is just a ping sweep and an NS lookup. Nothing special there. You can also manually enter your assets into the platform by going to Manage Assets and then clicking on the plus button at the top. This gives you the ability to find asset names, IP addresses. You can even set valuations for your different assets. With the import-export extra, you can import assets into the platform as well. But with our vulnerability management extra, you can actually configure the system to integrate with Rapid7 Expos or Inside VM, Tenable.io, or Qualys. And we can actually either automatically, based on a risk score, or manually, based on clicking this little checkbox, pull vulnerabilities into the platform. The system will pull in the list of assets as well from those vulnerability management tools, which we can then use in the vulnerability management section. Here we can create groups of assets for production, for PCI, and then we can even use what we call our risks and assets report to report on this information. Here we can see each of the assets and all the risk associated with it. It's a great way to identify assets that are harboring a lot of risks, candidates for patching or retirement. We can also flip this over and say, show me assets by risk, and this will show us each of our risks and all the assets associated with it. And this helps us to move from qualitative risk assessment, this is a very high level risk, to quantitative risk assessment. We can see that our maximum quantitative loss of these assets across this risk is $1 million. We also have the ability to conduct assessments in SimpleRisk. This originally started as the easy button. I had a lot of users who said, I like how simple and intuitive the platform is, but I don't know where to start. So we built in the CI's critical security controls and gave users the ability to answer yes, no questions. Yes, I do this. No, I don't do this, and so on. Hit submit, and the end result is what we called a pending risk, a valid risk based on the answers to the questions that you could then add into the system. What happened was we had a big university on the East Coast of the US come to us, and they said, hey, we really like this functionality, but we'd like to be able to send these out to people doing stuff in our environment. Around that same time, we had a big manufacturing company on the West Coast come to us, and they said, hey, we really like this, but we want to do third-party vendor risk assessments. So we created what's now known as our risk assessment extra. With risk assessment, you can create contacts. Contacts are users that you'll send an assessment to, but they do not have access into your system. From there, you can create questions, and we support both fill in the blank or multiple choice questions. Now, multiple choice is really interesting because we can say, hey, when they answer this particular question as no, go ahead and create a risk. Here's the subject of the risk, here's the risk score, the affected assets, and so on. But we can also do a compliance assessment. So we can map this question to one or more of our controls, and then based on that, we can say, go ahead and fail the control. We also have the ability to do a maturity assessment. With a maturity assessment, maybe these aren't yes/no questions. Maybe we're trying to figure out how mature their processes are. And when they say, no, we don't do this at all, we can map this to not performed. When they say, yes, we do it, it's fully automated, it's audited, we can map that to optimizing. So we can actually build a maturity scale into our questionnaire. And we can even build logic into our questionnaire and ask questions like, does your application store or process credit card data? And if they say yes, follow it up with, is the card data encrypted? Now, once we create our questions, we can create a template. Template is just the list of questions we want to ask and the order that we want to ask them in. But we also have the ability to dynamically create these questionnaires using the aforementioned secure controls framework. If I say yes, I'd like to automatically generate a questionnaire, we're given the full list of all the SCF frameworks. Remember, there's about 200 of them. We select the ones that we want, and then based on that framework, it's automatically going to create the list of questions that have to go along with it. And we can do either a standard questionnaire, which is yes, no, not applicable, or a maturity questionnaire. Give me the different maturity levels, adjust the resulting risk score accordingly. Once we create these templates, then we can create our questionnaires. And the questionnaire is simply how we link the questions we want to ask to the context that we want to send them to. We can provide some instruction. We can even set this up so they'll automatically reassess them a year later. And now we can see our results. Now here we can see my shortness CSF assessment. We can see all the results of this assessment. So we can see the questions that were asked, the answers that were provided with the one that was selected. I did a risk assessment here, so we can see 3 risks created, cumulative score of 19, average of 6.33. These are all pending risks, so we can decide whether or not to add these into our environment. I also did a compliance assessment, so here we can see the pass-fail status against the controls that I assessed against. And we even did a maturity assessment. So here we can see their level of maturity against the desired state. And now we can see each control that's below or above the desired level of maturity. And we can even share this with other people if we want them to see it. We also have incident management capabilities in SimpleRisk. This is through our Incident Management Extra. This lays out the NIST steps to prepare for an incident, how we go about identifying an incident, including saying the detection, the assignment, the prioritization, selecting locations, and associations with other incidents, risks, and assets, and then responding to these incidents. Each incident is going to show up here and gives us a playbook. So we can decide out of 9 different default playbooks or create our own what we want to do to handle this incident. So here we can see the containment steps, eradication steps, and recovery steps based on this playbook. We can attach evidence, we can add additional notes, we can even define lessons learned, and of course, we can report on these different incidents. Recently, we've started building more and more artificial intelligence functionality into SimpleRisk. The page that you see here is just some basic recommendations about your organization. You have an executive summary, key insights and data points, prioritized activities, compliance frameworks and justifications, concerns or recommendations for improvement. These come from the configure artificial intelligence functionality. Here, you can create an Anthropic API key and then provide some context information about your organization that the artificial intelligence uses to gauge the information about your organization. Now we're building additional functionality on top of it. This is part of the free and open source SimpleRisk, but we have risk advice. We have the ability to do documentation. All sorts of things are up and coming with respect to artificial intelligence in SimpleRisk. You will find all sorts of reporting in SimpleRisk. We talked about the overview earlier. You have a risk dashboard if you like pretty pie charts. The risk appetite report is going to show you all the risks that are within your appetite. These are risks that have been mitigated to an acceptable level, and all the risks that are outside of your appetite, things that still require further mitigation. You have the risk trends, so you can see how your risks are changing over time. The dynamic risk report is going to allow you to choose which fields are displayed within the report. Then you can come down below, you can filter through those different fields. You can even create save reports so that you can run them again later. The connectivity visualizer is one of my absolutely favorite reports. It allows you to select from different objects within the system, and it draws a picture of the relationships between them. Makes it very easy for you to see how different things within SimpleRisk are interconnected. Things like assets, controls, tests, even documentation. Risk average over time is going to show you all the risks over time, and you can see how the average is changing. Likelihood and impact is going to show you the different risks on a scale of likelihood and impact. And it's going to show you the list of all the risks that fit at each of the different levels with bigger bubbles for bigger risks. Risk advice is going to give you the different risks in there, the inherent and residual risk, as well as advice based on the level of effort for mitigation, as well as the inherent and residual risk scores. We talked about risks and assets. You also have risk and controls. Risk and controls will show us each of the different controls, all the risks that's associated with them, as well as each of the different risks and all the controls that are associated with them. The risks and issues report, this is going to show me each of the different risks, the status of those risks and the trend. Are they staying the same, going up or going down? And then the rest of these are just different ways to carve up the data within the system. Lastly, we have the configuration in SimpleRisk. First, we start with our settings. These are basic overall settings for how SimpleRisk works. You have things like your risk appetite, the language, the time zone. You can change the file upload settings within SimpleRisk, add different file types, increase the maximum upload file size, change the mail settings, the backups, the security, and so on. We also have a risk and threat catalog within SimpleRisk. This gives you the ability to define your own, as well as to use the ones that are built into the secure controls framework. You can change the risk formula within SimpleRisk. For classic risk, you can add additional values for both impact and likelihood. You can even change the formula that it uses to calculate them. And for contributing risks, you can add additional likelihood or impact values and change the weights associated. You can configure the review settings. You can add new values within SimpleRisk. And of course, we have very fine-grained permissions within the system. You can decide exactly what a user is able to do. You can bubble those up into roles and assign roles to different users. And then, of course, we have an audit trail of everything that users did within the system, who did what and when. Lastly, let's talk about extras. Extras are the plug-and-play modules that give you additional features and functionality within SimpleRisk. Starting with advanced search, by default in the SimpleRisk core, you can search for a risk ID here. With the advanced search extra, you can search for keywords and it'll show you where that word exists within the system. The API extra is a REST-based API. It allows you to programmatically interface with the system, so you can tie SimpleRisk in with other tools and technologies. For example, a CMDB, you can pull assets out of it. Artificial intelligence is the functionality tying SimpleRisk in with Anthropic, so you can ask Claude questions. You can pull risk data from Claude. Custom authentication is the ability to integrate SimpleRisk with Active Directory or SAML for single sign-on. Customization is the ability to create new fields, to remove existing fields, or to change the order of the fields on the page. Now, by default, MySQL databases are clear text. With the encrypted database extra, we add AES 256-bit encryption of sensitive fields prior to insertion into the database, so even a DBA couldn't read them. Import-export is the ability to import data from a spreadsheet, export data to a spreadsheet. It also includes our content catalog. Incident management is the incident management module, giving you the ability to include incidents in the platform, the ability to use playbooks to triage those incidents, and then capture reporting around those incidents. Jira is the bidirectional communication with the Jira instance. Notifications, the action-based and scheduled notifications. Risk assessments are the questionnaires, being able to ask risk, compliance, and maturity assessments. The Secure Controls Framework is a free extra. That's the common control framework with over 1,000 different controls, over 200 different frameworks. Team-based separation, by default, every user sees every risk within SimpleRisk. Now, team-based separation builds walls or silos. So my Unix team sees Unix risk, my network team sees network risk. They'll never see each other. Organizational hierarchy builds an additional layer of a business unit above that. So my legal team only sees the legal users, the legal teams, and the legal risks. Unified Compliance Framework is another common control framework, very similar to Secure Controls Framework. And then Vulnerability Management is that API level integration with Rapid7 Expose, Inside VM, Tenable.io, and Qualys. I hope that you enjoyed this demo of the features and functionality of the SimpleRisk platform for governance, risk management, and compliance. Even more so, I hope that you've been picturing all the potential challenges that we can help your organization to solve. With SimpleRisk, you can go from zero to GRC in minutes, either by downloading the core platform for an on-premise installation at www.simplerisk.com/download, or by requesting a free 30-day, no strings attached trial of all the SimpleRisk capabilities at www.simplerisk.com/try. We look forward to working with you.